In the Missouri General Assembly, Democrats are largely concentrated in districts in St. Louis and Kansas City. The exception is Boone County, where Representatives Kip Kendrick and Martha Stevens represent the city of Columbia in the Missouri House. The two Democrats joined me at KBIA studios in Columbia to talk about life under Republican rule and the 2018 legislative session. That's what's coming up next on the latest edition of Politically Speaking, so let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, a candid conversation with the Show Me State's biggest political newsmakers.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm Joe Manis.
That's Eric Greitens, Navy SEALs running for governor, and I'm really glad to be on with you, Jason and Joe.
I'm going to push back on these regulators.
I'm doing this for the people.
I was encouraged along the way, not just by my family, but by a lot of teachers and professors, and knew when I was in college that I would run for office someday.
We're very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions.
Even though after the conversation, I still might not agree.
We want our listeners to get a real sense of what drives these people.
They're actually people with a story to tell. And welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast, the only show about Missouri politics featuring a host who just ate a great salad at Ingredient Restaurant. I am that host, Jason Rosenbaum, the interim political editor with St. Louis Public Radio. I am in Columbia, Missouri, where I lived for almost 7 years. Nostalgia is flowing through my veins right now as I talk in KBIA's beautiful McReynolds Hall studios. And joining me today are two guests. They are the two Democrats that represent mid-Missouri. Their first guest today is somebody we've had on the show before.
Kip Kendrick. I represent the 45th District.
And the other guest is a newcomer to the Politically Speaking universe we have here today.
Martha Stevens, and I represent the 46th District.
Thank you all very much for coming today. As I said before, I have a soft spot in my heart for Columbia, and I always love getting Boone County area lawmakers from both parties on this show. Just for our listeners, if you could just describe what your district encompasses and which parts of Boone County. I'll start with you, Representative Stevens.
Sure. So the 46th District is all within city limits here in Columbia, and it's mostly the central and the west parts of Columbia and South Columbia.
And you, Representative Kendrick?
Yeah, it also is encompassed completely within city limits. It's pretty much the eastern part of Columbia north.
So which one of you has the University of Missouri Columbia?
I have all the university except for the athletic facilities, which are in Martha's district.
Oh my gosh!
Correct.
Are you happy about that? I don't know if you like Mizzou sports at all. So
I will admit that I don't follow sports as much as I probably should, but I am a proud graduate of Mizzou, so always rooting for them.
Yeah, to be candid, like I have not kept up on Mizzou sports as I should. They've not been very good, so I've kind of switched my allegiance to Northwestern's athletic teams, where I used to live in Evanston, Illinois. So we've had you on the show, as I mentioned before, Representative Kendrick. You can go back to 2015 and you can hear your life story, and we talk about Northeast Missouri politics ad nauseum. I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum on this show. It's almost like a nervous tick. But Representative Stevens, you're a freshman legislator. I want you to take this opportunity to tell people about yourself, what you did before politics, and why you decided to run for the State House.
Sure, absolutely. Well, my background's in social work, so I've been doing that for the past 10 years, worked for different non-for-profits, went back and got my master's in social work and started to do more work on a policy level in different advocacy groups. So I worked here in Columbia as a community organizer for Planned Parenthood, and after that I went on to work with the Missouri Medicaid Coalition, fighting for Medicaid expansion here in Missouri. So I've been doing that work in the past, and there was an opportunity when Stephen Weber turned out to run, and I had some people encourage me, and I decided that I would run for office. And really, I see my background in advocacy and social work really carries over, and I just happen to be an advocate at the state level, trying to pass good legislation to lift up communities.
Both of your districts have been historically Democratic, so whoever wins the primary is typically the person that wins. You're lucky enough to where you didn't have a primary back in 2014, which I'm sure, in retrospect, you're very joyous about. You actually did have to run in a pretty competitive primary against a countywide official. Kathy Richards, was that her name?
Correct.
I want to make sure I got her name right. I actually remember when she was elected public administrator. That was an interesting race, and I do follow Boone County races, as you can tell.
Sure.
It was interesting in the sense that there have been other races before where a candidate tries to, I guess, showcase their social conservative bona fides, even when they're a Democrat. Occasionally successful. In 2006, Paul Quinn beat Yul Lawson. And you probably know Paul Quinn very well, Representative Kendrick, because he's from Monroe County.
Family friend.
But I didn't really think that was going to be very successful strategy in your particular contest, because your district is primarily the city of Columbia. That's kind of the backdrop that I saw. What was it like for you to run against this established political figure who was trying to outflank you on the issues I mentioned, and probably some other things as well?
Yeah, well, I got into the race pretty early, so I feel like I had a good head start when it came to gathering endorsements and door knocking and fundraising. I think I was definitely the more progressive candidate, and I didn't shy away from that on many different issues. But it was a competitive race, and I didn't take anything for granted, and I raised money and I knocked so many doors.
And you probably talked to like 100 media outlets, right?
Yes, I tried to make myself as available. I think that's part of our role as candidates and also elected officials, is to communicate with our constituents, but also with local media. So I didn't shy away from that.
Well, the 150 media outlets in Columbia are probably very glad for this. So when I was covering the Boone County legislative delegation, I think it fluctuated between having 3 or 4 Democrats depending on the year. There was obviously a time when the senator was a Democrat, so maybe it was even up to 5. Now we're down to 2 because the 2 seats which I would classify as reasonably competitive, I believe it's the 44th and the 47th, are now occupied by Republicans. So I'm just curious, though, what is the Boone County delegation like right now? Do you feel like it's pretty cohesive, even though it's your Democrats and the majority of people are Republicans? Do you occasionally clash on certain localized issues? I know this is kind of an insular line of questioning, but oftentimes the Boone County delegation is pretty close-knit, and I'm interested to hear how it is right now.
I think, when we've all really come together to be strong advocates for the university. I think that's something that we're all really committed to. But there are a number of issues that we definitely don't agree on, though.
Representative Kendrick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, echo the same thing. I mean, there are things we disagree on, but there's also the unifying force of the university, which is powerful for Boone County, and for the city of Columbia. There's also, there's also other issues that we work on at the city level. We have a Chamber of Commerce event last night where they rolled out a legislative platform that was, that wasn't partisan, that was very much putting Columbia first, and it looked like there's something that legislative platform that we could all agree upon and work towards. And so I think having a strong community, strong community presence from outreach from constituents, civic leaders that are all on the same page also helps us be unified.
Well, that kind of leads me into kind of issues, and we'll talk about the University of Missouri-Columbia first. We're 2 years removed from the protests at Mizzou that ousted Tim Wolf and Chancellor Lofton. This is kind of a funny story, but when I was actually preparing to interview Speaker Richardson for a previous podcast, I came into his office and Moon Choi was standing there, and I'd never met him before, but I was like, yeah, you can talk to the speaker first, because I am an UMSL employee and I don't want to upset the person who is technically my boss. That humorous anecdote aside, one of the things that brief encounter showcased to me, it seems that President Choi is making a very concerted effort to have a line of communication open with the legislature, which seems to be a vital thing post-2015. What's kind of your impressions of him? And more generally, how do you think the University of Columbia is standing right now in the General Assembly?
President Choi came in, and he's had to make a tremendous amount of difficult decisions in short order as well. I'm confident that the decisions he's making are solid, and he has good reasons for the decisions he's making. He's spending a lot of time in Jefferson City as well, as you said, making inroads and building relationships, which I think is important. It's important to rebuild trust inside the building. I'm also concerned, generally speaking, about the budget. I don't know. it's very possible university takes potential hits again this year because it's not a good budget picture. So, I hope he continues to build relationships. I hope we can rebuild the trust. I don't know if it's going to make a whole lot of difference as far as how the budget looks this year.
Representative Stevens, what's kind of your prognosis on that issue?
Yeah, I think echo Kip, but I think I'm excited about the new leadership that's come on board. I think that the fact that they spend a great deal of time down in Jeff City, like they did last year, and that they're trying to form stronger relationships with legislators. I think that's really important. And so, a lot of this work that we do is a lot about relationship building. And so I think, our job in a lot of ways is, to encourage our colleagues who aren't necessarily, in our community, to let them know the value that the university brings statewide.
Well, since you are on the House Budget Committee, you're actually now the ranking member. Congratulations on that, by the way. I do want to talk about what you just alluded to, which is that last year, higher education took a pretty sizable hit. I mean, I think that they were cut by 6, 7, 8%.
Right, and then the additional withholds day one of the budget year took them to 10%.
I know this conversation is somewhat academic because it would require a whole lot of things to happen. But my big takeaway from that was, as long as universities across the state are funded primarily with general revenue that governors can withhold on a whim, and it's not like a direct funding source like a cigarette tax or some other things, we're going to have these fluctuations of higher education spending. And I've asked people, has there been any discussion about trying to figure out another way to fund universities? And I've gotten kind of a sense that, well, it would be a great idea, but no one is really talking about that seriously because it would not be without a lot of, controversy. I'm interested to hear your take on that because my gut feeling is that universities like University of Missouri Columbia are going to be funded pretty much the same way. But it seems like this is kind of at least a opening of conversation to maybe think it should be funded some other way. What do you think about that?
Well, I always use something that you said on the radio in every line I use talking about university funding, and that public higher education is the balancing, the balancing wheel basically for budgets. And that's not just unique to Missouri. It happens all across this nation. A few years ago, there was discussion about a Missouri Promise, a cigarette tax that would have dedicated funding to help pay for college higher education for students. There hasn't been much of a discussion, moving to a different revenue stream outside of general revenue. And until we see, I think you're exactly right. As long as we continue to use general revenue, anytime that there's cuts that have to be made, higher education will be one of the first places that we always go, unfortunately. And it's not going to stop.
Yeah, I think it's either going to be that or there's going to have to just be a general feeling that higher education should be more of a priority in that limited general revenue pie. I know we're getting a little esoteric, but this is actually a really important point when we're talking about colleges and universities. I guess more generally, though, do you feel that University of Missouri Columbia's reputation has improved among the legislature? I think that I would say even some Democrats were upset with how the leadership performed in 2015. And whether or not you agreed with the protests or not, I think that there was a feeling like there needed to be better leadership. What do you think the legislative feeling is about Mizzou right now, Representative Stevens?
Sure. Excuse me, I wasn't down there when this happened. Last year, I think the new leadership that came in was making a good effort down in Jeff City, talking to folks. I can't really speak to everyone's, opinion about the university, but I think it's definitely improved.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think the general sense is that relationships have improved. The trust in the university has improved, and that's directly because of the leadership that we've had come on. Some of the decisions that are being made now should have been made years ago, and I think President Choi has and Chancellor Cartwright have a clear directive that they need to make these difficult decisions.
Now, I want to talk about a topic that you're each sponsoring. I'll start with you, Representative Stevens. I read that you are sponsoring a bill that would make it. And if I'm describing this wrong, obviously correct me. It involves needle exchanges, because my understanding right now is it is almost impossible to open a needle exchange in Missouri, and it comes as there is this widespread use of heroin, especially in places like the St. Louis area. So that's kind of the general thing I read. If you want to just describe what it does and why you think it's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so excuse me, I sponsored a needle exchange bill this year to decriminalize these type of programs. 33 other states have done this. Other conservative states have done this. And it's really a harm reduction policy to really meet people where they are when it comes to addressing the opioid epidemic, and to make sure that they're as safe and as healthy as they can be while they're still using. So needle exchange programs, there's a lot of really great evidence out there that shows that people that utilize them are 5 times more likely to receive treatment. It can be a point of entry into treatment when they access these programs. I think there's also some really compelling evidence that's come out recently from the CDC. There are 7 states that have over 10 counties that are at high risk of an HIV outbreak, and Missouri is one of those states.
How big of a problem is it in Boone County? Like, I'm getting a sense that this is not just a situation that affects like the rural parts, because we talk a lot about opioids in rural parts. I would imagine it's a problem everywhere.
It's a problem everywhere. I've talked to local law enforcement over the interim about the opioid epidemic, and hearing their stories of what they see with people overdosing that they encounter. A good bill that passed last year is another harm reduction bill, was the 911 Good Samaritan bill, where folks can call and they won't be, if they have personal possession, they won't be charged with that, because that's the number one deterrent from people wanting to call for help to receive medical attention. So I've had conversations with local law enforcement about that bill, and so. I think it's a problem in every community. I think drug addiction doesn't discriminate. It's everywhere.
It does seem, and this is just my observation, it seems like, unlike say the 1980s, when there was a big emphasis on putting drug users in jail, and I'm talking about the crack epidemic, and I'm talking about primarily African American users, there has been kind of a consensus that did not work, and there needs to be a treatment pathway, because the heroin epidemic is not just a white thing. It's also a big problem in the African American community, and it just seems like politicians from Republicans and Democrats are thinking we need to get these people in treatment. We don't need to put them in jail. Is that kind of what you're sensing too, or is this just overly optimistic in like a quote unquote law and order state like Missouri?
So I'm glad that you brought up, the way we treated drug addiction, because it is a disease, and really I'm glad that we're moving away from a criminal lens into more of a public health lens. But I think we have to know that in the past, those types of laws really targeted communities of color, and so, I'm glad that we're having the conversation. Again, looking more through a public health lens. Whether or not that's because now it's hitting white Americans, I'm glad that we're changed. That's a shift, but we have to also really acknowledge the way we used to criminalize it and how it destroyed communities of color.
Yeah, that has been my impulse to think, well, we're talking about this because suburban communities are dealing with heroin abuse. But the reason I don't make that argument is my former colleague, Dury Buscarin of St. Louis Public Radio, pointed out that this is a really severe problem in the black community in St. Louis. So I don't actually think it's a white problem. It's everywhere. Whether it's getting more attention now because it's happening more in suburban white areas, that's up for people to decide.
Sure.
What do you think the prognosis is of your bill passing? Because we had another guest on our show, Representative Holly Rader, a Republican from Sikeston, who is also interested in this particular issue. It does seem like there's some bipartisan consensus, at least among some Republicans. How do you think this will fare this year?
I'm optimistic about it. I don't know if it will happen this year, but again, I think we have to go back to the fact that we're on this hot list that's been put out by the CDC. There's a lot of collateral damage around the consequences of this. And so I think, I plan on talking to legislators who are in those counties and working with them and, educating them about what's going on. And hopefully we'll get some buy-in that way. Dr. Randall Williams, who's the head of Health and Senior Services, is on board with it. So I think that's really positive. He comes from North Carolina, where they passed this similar bill in reaction to the opiate epidemic. In Indiana, the governor at the time, now Vice President Pence, signed an executive order for a needle exchange program, and that was very reactionary to the crisis that they were experiencing. After one rural town, 219 folks were contracted with HIV. So I think I'm optimistic about it. I think it's a good policy solution. There's good evidence behind it, and the opiate epidemic is something that I think has a lot of bipartisan support. And I plan on having a lot of discussions with colleagues about this one-on-one this year.
Representative Kendrick, I was not at this press conference, but I believe that you were one of the people in your caucus that put forth ethics-related legislation. Before I guess what it was wrong, if you could just explain what your particular bill does. And also, did you also introduce ethics legislation as well?
No, but I will be co-sponsoring and supporting our package.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't leaving anything that you had out. But Representative Kendrick, please continue.
Yeah, so there was a package of 10 bills signed by 10 different sponsors, sponsored by 10 different individuals within Democratic caucus. But these are, not partisan bills. It's a comprehensive legislative package of ethics reform. My bill in particular deals with dark money. And rather than going the typical route of trying to identify donors within 501c4s or, other dark money organizations, this is doing more to tie reporting of in-kind contributions, or making sure that political activity is tracked, so that the organizations are having to submit when they support a candidate or coming out against a candidate, so that there's more clarity on more transparency and clarity on what these organizations are doing.
So basically, let's say I'm going to just make up a 501c4. The Jason Rosenbaum is awesome 501c4. If somebody gave me $1 million and I spent $1 million against Governor Greitens in his reelection, I would basically have to fill out a form with the MEC saying, Jason Rosenbaum is awesome 501c4, spent $1 million against Eric Greitens.
That's right. It's tracking it, and what the scenario that you gave was very clear, very black and white. But there are oftentimes nuanced ways that these ads get these ads get constructed. So we want to make sure that there's a clear path to the organization and who they're supporting or opposing, or what ballot measure they may be supporting or opposing at the same time.
I'm glad you mentioned ballot measures. This has been something that I've reported on. And I've reported on the governor's 501c4 extensively. But one of the things that I noticed from looking at the MEC reports is there's a lot of money from nonprofits that don't disclose their donors going into the minimum wage increase initiative, which I'm sure you know about. Actually, the Missouri Democratic Party endorsed that initiative. I guess my question is more general. Does it give you some discomfort that your party is endorsing a ballot initiative that has been funded with a great deal of quote-unquote dark money? Or is this a situation where raising the minimum wage is a noble goal, and as the treasurer told me of that, they don't want to have one arm tied behind their back when there could be quote-unquote dark money groups against them? I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that.
Well, that's a good question, and it has been a long time since we've had any type of significant increase in the minimum wage. I think that this is long overdue. This is not necessarily a Democratic ballot measure either. If you look at polling, Republicans in general are supportive. Republican voters, constituents are generally supportive of a minimum wage increase as well. I think that there's definitely something that the Democratic Party stands for, and the House caucus in particular is very much in support of a minimum wage increase. You do raise a good point, though. Should we be concerned with potential organizations that don't have disclosed donors supporting it. I'm not going to necessarily weigh in because again it is free of the Democratic Party. Democratic Party is supporting it, and I support the minimum wage increase as well. I think it's a reasonable ballot initiative. I think that the 12.
It was 12 or $13.
Yeah, close a little over $12. I think is by 2024 is realistic and a good start for us.
And I do want to just make a point here. It's not being funded completely by these nonprofits. There are a lot of disclosed donors that are going to this, and I made that very clear in the story that I wrote. And frankly, there are some conservative 501c4s which are now pouring a lot of money to prevent right to work from being repealed. I'm sure, as Lou Price told me, it's very possible 501c4s could come out to try to stop raising the minimum wage. I guess my point, though, is that it does seem like, while this is primarily a Republican thing going on, there are dark money groups that are going to help things that Democrats agree with. And also, they're helping Claire McCaskill, too.
Yeah,
so it's I don't see it as a partisan issue either. I think it's kind of a bipartisan problem that's coming about. So
I agree with you 100%. I think so. I think that as the rules are written currently, allowing dark money in politics, you're going to continue to see it from both sides of the aisle. Consistently hear Democrats supporting, greater transparency and shutting down of dark money organizations to bring greater light to it. That being said, I don't blame Democrats who don't speak out against dark money that is going to help them as the rules are currently written. It's a problem. Amendment 2 was good in theory in the state of Missouri, what passed in 2016, and I think it will hopefully eventually be good in practice as well, but it will, without a doubt, lead to a greater proliferation of dark money in the state of Missouri.
I think, and I've told this to other Republican guests, the legislature has to act to deal with the deficiencies of Amendment 2. That might sound like opinion, but it's more of like a fact. Yep. It's not indisputed that people are using PACs now to get around those limits. It's not indisputed. It's not indisputed. Is that even a word? I don't even know. I'm just on a rant here. It's not in dispute that 501c4s are being used. It's actually very easy for someone to donate to a 501c4 from their campaign committee. It's actually in state law that says you can do that. And also just the coordination statutes are very, very weak now. You all could go to a PAC that helps both of you, say, raise $1 million for this PAC, and that PAC helps you. So I don't know. Republicans are not really typically keen on campaign donation limits, so it would seem like they may not want to do any of this, but unless they want this system to be what it is, legislature has to act.
And I would say also, I think that brings up the ballot initiative of Clean Missouri, which really is going to seek to try to address some of these issues around campaigns, limitations in these PACs, and then some other things around addressing the extreme gerrymandering that we have in Missouri.
Well, I'm gonna stop myself there because I'm kind of a redistricting nerd. So because I do want to talk about other issues besides redistricting. What other issues do you think are going to be important for your caucus? I want to. This is kind of like a free period where you get to talk about whatever you want. Representative Stevens.
Oh, sure. Well, I think as we've mentioned, there's many different bills that we've put together to address the opioid epidemic. Also around that, there's a lot of issues around women's health care when it comes to the pretty devastating rates that we have of maternal mortality in Missouri. We rank 42nd in the state, 50th being the worst. And so I think there's a lot of bills that we're going to be putting together that will focus on that issue. And a lot of that's investing in healthcare and public health, which we sadly don't really do in our state. And so I think those are some of the bills. I think the ethics bills, and of course, I think we'll continue to have the fight around really standing up for workers, and then also I think there's probably public schools. I think we'll have that debate again around charter schools.
Yeah, Representative Kendrick.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think a big debate this year is going to be education, public education. I think there also could be a large debate on taxes as well. And, a tax bill that's been filed to eventually phase out the income tax in the state of Missouri seems to have gotten at least more media traction and than I originally thought, and seems to have some traction maybe going into session, which is very concerning.
Although Senate President Pro Tem Ron Richards said he didn't want a Brownback thing, which means like he doesn't want Missouri to become Kansas because he lives pretty close to Kansas, and he's not all powerful, obviously, but that was interesting that the Senate leadership wants to take it a bit slow with tax cuts, given that the tax cut that was passed, 2014? 13? Hasn't even gone into effect 100% yet, in my understanding.
We will just be in the second year of that phase-in starting in FY19, and it's, from what I understand, the second-year phase-in is going to be above what we thought. The cost of it is going to be much more impactful than what was originally anticipated.
Let's just kind of shift a little in the final minutes to politics. So it's 2018. It's an election year. I would say, and maybe I'm wrong on this, I think both of you, if you choose to run for re-election, are in pretty good positions. You're in Democratic districts, and typically people who are in very Democratic districts try to help other Democrats win in more competitive districts. I've asked Democratic people in the House, like every cycle, is this going to be the year that you gain a lot of seats? 2016 was, I think you gained 1 seat because Keith English was an independent. It was replaced by a Democrat. I think in 14 you lost a few seats.
Seven, I think, yeah.
12, I think you lost 3 or 4 seats. And 10 was obviously terrible, like 17 seats. So it hasn't been a good few election cycles, but your predecessor in the legislature, Stephen Weber, is everywhere. He's trying to get more people to run for office. And it could be a Democratic year if Trump's approval ratings are low. So how do you think you guys are going to do? Do you think you'll add another member to your Boone County delegation and also other Democrats to help you guys out? Representative Stevens.
Sure. I'm excited about 2018, but I'm also realistic. I think that I really look at getting out of the super minority as it's going to take some time. It's not going to just be 2018. And I think people need to realize that this is going to be a long term. I think that, we have to pass things like Clean Missouri so that we don't have such gerrymandered districts, because that really is responsible for a lot of the makeup right now. But also, I'm really proud of the folks that are out there recruiting candidates. That's one of the things that hurts us when we don't even have a Democratic candidate running for a House seat. And so those numbers are up. We're raising money. I think people are a lot more engaged. I think some people after the 2018 elections realized that it's really important to vote local and to get involved in state races.
Yeah, Representative Kendrick, there's no question that the 2011 House map was not good for Democrats. I'm not even going to try to make an argument that it was. But one of the things we've talked about before is you had a situation where, like, the aforementioned Paul Quinn lost in a district with Monroe County, I believe Rawls County, and Pike County, which are 3 very historically Democratic counties. And the next cycle, I don't think the candidate that ran got any support. And then in 16, nobody ran in that area. So is it a question that, gerrymandering and bad maps, or is it also like you have to have candidates in these places that are well supported with money and organization? I'm sure it's a combination of both, but the map's not going to change until 2022. So how does that come into play, that just there hasn't been enough competition in these traditionally Democratic rural parts of the state?
Right. I think that if you, from talking with people who have really studied the gerrymandering issue in the state of Missouri, I think that if we had different maps, you'd have, potential pickup of 10 House Democrats, putting more districts in play. But you're right, it's not the total reason why we've lost favor. I think part of it is like a lot of what is message, or what Missourians believe is a message, comes from the national level, beamed in through the television. I think a lot of that, doesn't necessarily play well in rural Missouri. But as you mentioned, it's been kind of a crumbling of the Democratic Party's infrastructure in rural Missouri, across not just rural Missouri, everywhere in the state. And I'm proud of what Stephen Weber has done. You know, Stephen's a good friend, and he's been everywhere. He is, you know, I was up in Monroe County, Monroe City this summer, and you know, at that point they said he'd been there. Someone from the party had been there twice already that year, and that was unheard of. They hadn't been there in probably the 10 years prior to that. Really,
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I mean, that's crazy. Again, Monroe County was Democratic in 2006, 2008, and 2010, and the fact that there was no effort to build up the organization in a place like that, our Pike County, or other parts of Northeast Missouri or Southeast Missouri, it seems like malpractice. And it seems like, now Chairman Weber realizes that, because he's going to these places, he's trying to rev up Democrats that are still there and trying to build an organization. This is kind of an off-the-wall question that I want to ask both of you. I know you're both Democrats, but do you think that there are some Republican colleagues that wish they had a smaller majority because it'd be easier to control? I'm gonna go with you,
Can I answer
Representative.
that?
Yeah,
absolutely. I wouldn't put the speaker or anybody else on the spot, and I definitely don't want to speak for them. But I imagine, that there are a few members who wish there were, at times, fewer members, because it'd be easier to control. It's also, and not just from that. I think that we see some good legislation that gets going down the tracks. Then they have such a large supermajority that bad amendments get added to these bills. They become bad bills, but they are so far down the track you can't take them off, right? I mean, they're going to pass, they're going to go into law, and it's going to be bad legislation. I feel like when you have, if you had a stronger Democratic voice, if you had a closer, not necessarily equal, I don't think Democrats want that. I think they'd still like 95 plus, right? But
you'd like to have 117 members, but this is in Illinois, unfortunately.
Right.
Continue.
But I think that they would I think it would be best for the legislative process if we had a stronger voice. I think it would be better for Missouri as a whole, even for conservatives. I think that by being able to keep some bad amendments getting on good pieces of legislation, it would help in the long run protect us from lawsuits and costly lawsuits to the state, but also making sure that we have good legislation and hopefully stay away from embarrassing topics that make our state look backwards at times. And we've seen some of those. I mean, we've seen some issues that have come up that are very problematic on a national level and trying to recruit businesses and young people to stay in the state.
What's your thoughts on this, Representative?
Yeah, I think what Kip makes some great points about it. I'm certainly, I think, that there are probably some Republicans that maybe want. I think there might be too many Republicans down there. I don't know. I can't speak for other folks, but I think that's probably certainly the case. I'm sure. I think at times, their party is so big, and they have a conservative caucus, and at times they probably, take votes on things that they maybe don't want to have to take votes on. So I think that probably happens sometimes, but also, I mean, there has been some really extreme bills that don't reflect well on Missouri. So votes around personhood, these anti-trans bills around bathroom bills, and things like that.
I think the last area of politics I want to talk about is it is not only legislators who are running; it's two Democratic statewide officials, Claire McCaskill and Nicole Galloway, and I kind of believe that their fates are tied together. If Claire McCaskill loses, I think it's going to be difficult for Auditor Galloway to win. She might win anyways. I could be surprised, but that's the conventional wisdom. And kind of what I see the map for them to win is they have to have very strong turnout in St. Louis, Kansas City, and in Columbia, which has become more competitive, but still has a lot of Democratic voters. They don't necessarily have to win rural Missouri, but they have to at least compete there. They got to get 35-40% in some of those counties. And then some of the suburbs, they have to either win or, again, compete. It's a difficult pathway. It was a lot easier in 2006 for Claire McCaskill to do it than it is now. We're in Columbia right now. Boone County, as I mentioned, has become more competitive. How important do you think this area is for someone like McCaskill or Galloway to get another term. I'll start with you, Representative Stevens.
I think I have a lot of confidence in both of those campaigns. I'm optimistic about this year. I think they both have great messages. Auditor Galloway has been such a strong and really fair statewide auditor. I mean, she is so qualified for that position with her background. And I think that the results are really there for her, what she can go out to all communities and talk about her record. I think, Boone County, we are going to work hard to turn people out to vote because it's about getting folks out to vote, on up and down the ballot for Democrats.
And what's your thought on this, Representative Kendrick?
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, it's important that we have a strong turnout here in Columbia, but as you mentioned, Democrats can't be performing at 10, 12, 15% in rural Missouri and expect for a Democrat to win a statewide office. It's just not possible. So, I mean, we have to have strong turnout in our urban areas, suburban areas, but rural Missouri, we need to make sure that we're competitive. And I think that's been part of the focus of what Stephen's been doing is making sure that we're rebuilding trust and rebuilding some of the infrastructure in rural areas.
Well, I want to thank both of you for this great conversation. I have to drive back to St. Louis right now, so I'm going to leave very quickly. But for all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org, also kbia.org. Thank you very much, KBIA, for letting me interlope in your studios. Follow me on Twitter, Jay Rosenbaum. How would people follow you on Twitter or any other parts of the World Wide Web, Representative Stevens?
Sure, it's Martha for Mo.
And Representative Kendrick?
Kip_Kendrick. If you search Kip Kendrick, there's not too many of us out there.
Underscore is important.